Hi, my name is Jeremy Hickerson, and in addition to my interest in music, I also have an interest in writing, and I've written a sort of memoir in the style of Karl Ove Knausgaard's My Struggle books. Right now, I'm going to read a short chapter from that, and this takes place in my second year of college, where I was going to Multnomah School of the Bible in Portland, Oregon. I had gone to Moody Bible Institute in Chicago the previous year. And on a Christmas vacation from Moody the previous year, I had seen Ian Mitchell, the head of the guitar studies program at Lewis and Clark College, in a concert. He's a classical guitarist, and I had been very impressed. And so when I went to Multnomah the next year and moved to Portland, lived at home with my parents, they were also going to Multnomah, and that's another story. Then I thought to myself, I wonder if I could get lessons from Ian Mitchell. He was the only classical guitarist I even knew of in town, so I didn't necessarily want to take lessons from somebody that high powered, but that's the only name I had. So I called him on the phone, and he set me up with one of his students for an introductory lesson, and that's what this chapter is about. It's called Wayne Gottschall, who was the name of the student. In the spring of 1981, near the end of my first year at Multnomah, I decided I would try to take guitar lessons from Ian Mitchell, head of the guitar program at nearby Lewis and Clark College. He was the guitarist whose concert I had gone to the previous Christmas. I called the college and got his number, then called him and told him I was a beginning guitarist and could play some of the SOAR studies. "Before we start, let me set you up with one of my students," he said, in his somewhat sly but kind voice. "Wayne Gottschall, let me give you his number. He can show you the hand positions." I took down the number, somewhat relieved that I didn't have to face Mitchell right away. I hadn't necessarily wanted a teacher of his caliber, a concert musician. He was just the only classical guitarist in Portland that I knew about. I called Wayne, he gave me his address, and the next afternoon I borrowed the car, put my nylon string guitar in the back seat along with the folding footstool that classical guitarists use, and drove over there. He had a room in an old house on Corbett Avenue up above Barber Boulevard, a few miles south of Portland State University. I had located the address on the map in the front of the phone book, so I didn't have much trouble finding it. Parked cars lined the street, but I managed to find a parking place on the next block. I grabbed my guitar and footstool, locked the car, and walked down the sidewalk and then up the cement stairs onto the big front porch, where I rang the doorbell. A college-age guy with glasses and counterculture shoulder-length hair opened the door. "Hello, is Wayne Gottschall there?" I said. "I've got a guitar lesson." "Yeah, Wayne's here. Come on in." I stepped into the dark entryway and stood for a moment in the living room. No lights were on, but muted light came through the windows. "Wayne's in his room." The counterculture guy waved his hand toward a hallway, then disappeared down it. Here I was, fresh out of a year at Moody Bible Institute, one of the more conservative Christian colleges around, and Multnomah, which was still pretty insulated, standing in a worldly college rental house among worldly wise college students. Could they tell how out of place I was? I tried to act natural, all the while wondering what displays of rampant sin I might witness. I walked down the hallway, then stopped at an open door where I saw a guy in his early 20s sitting on the bed, holding a classical guitar. He had light brown, slightly greasy hair and a gentle face. A girl of about 18 with long dishwater blonde hair sat in a chair opposite him. She also had a guitar. "Wayne," I said. "Are you Jeremy? I'll just be a few minutes. I'm finishing up with one of my students." "Oh, sorry," I said, and walked back to the living room where I waited. A few moments later, the girl came out, wearing a backpack and carrying her guitar. She smiled at me as I walked past her into the hallway, and I smiled back. "Hello," Wayne said when I came into the room. "Hi. Ian told me you wanted to learn the hand positions?" "Yes, that's what he suggested when I talked to him on the phone." "Good. Why don't you get out your guitar and play something for me?" I put the guitar case down on the floor and pulled out my guitar, then played an E chord to make sure it was in tune. Then I situated myself in the chair and adjusted the footstool to a good height. I never seemed to be able to sit in a relaxed position when I played, and began the first source study, a chord melody hymn-like piece with moving inner voices. He let me play it all the way through without comment. I felt proud that I hadn't hit any wrong notes, although I couldn't get some of the important ones to sound for the voice leading that was so crucial to the impact of this study. That was good, he said. Your right hand position is pretty close to what it should be, but try relaxing it. Just let it hang. Your left hand is too far back. Keep your thumb under the neck, not up by the bass strings. Let your elbow hang down, and your left hand and fingers should curve over the strings like this. He demonstrated. Now play the first few measures again with a relaxed hand and with your thumb under the neck. Let's take them at a slower tempo. I played again and noticed the improvement. That's good, he said. Try to keep the bass notes connected. This piece needs to sound flowing, which is difficult because you're changing chords on every beat. Try playing just the bass line by itself and make it sound connected. Then play the rest of the notes and keep that connection of the bass notes. If the bass notes are smooth, the whole thing will sound smooth. He played the bass line by itself for several measures, then added the rest of the notes. See what I mean? His guitar sound was so rich, and he added vibrato on the fretted notes of the chords, making it sound more musical, just like John Williams' recording of this source study on the record I had borrowed from the library. Wayne had captured that sound and now called it forth, sitting on his unmade bed in the small room strewn with clothes, books, papers, and other artifacts of a student's life. I sat opposite him and drank it in, wanting to sound like him, wanting to be him. On the bed was Wayne's copy of the source studies. He put it on the music stand in front of him and began flipping through it, playing the opening of each piece. That's a good one, he said. Do you play it? Yes, I said. It was a simpler one, and I had worked on it. How about this one, he said, after turning a few more pages. It was a fast piece that was beyond me. No, I haven't worked on it. How about Bach? Do you play any Bach pieces? I began the Bourrée in E minor, which I had worked on a lot and played pretty well. That's a nice piece, he said, but I like the Allemande better. I had forgotten that the Bourrée was part of one of Bach's lute suites, and there were other movements. I'd have to check that out. He played the Allemande for me. His playing was so expressive and musical. And he was right. The Allemande was cooler, with longer flowing lines of counterpoint, yet it wasn't so complex that I wouldn't be able to play it. The phone in the hallway rang. The guy who had let me in answered it, then called out, "Wayne, it's for you." Wayne handed me his guitar. "Here, play this if you want." I played through a few pieces I had memorized while he talked on the phone. The guitar sounded so much better than mine. My guitar looked and played okay, but it had a plywood top. The notes didn't have nearly the richness of Wayne's, which even in my hands sounded pretty good, although it didn't magically transform me into someone who could play like him. After a few minutes, I ran out of things to play and listened to the phone conversation, which was going strong and showed no sign of ending any time soon. Apparently, Wayne's guitar teacher, I assumed it was Ian Mitchell, was talking through the program of a recital Wayne was to give, and they were deciding which pieces to include. Wayne talked for about 10 minutes, then it was back to my lesson. "Sorry about that," he said. "That was Ian. He wanted to know what I would be playing in my recital next week. I've been so busy the last few days. I just finished a big paper. I had to analyze a symphony." Wow, that must have been tough. It was. I'm so glad I'm done with it. He picked up his guitar and began playing a more modern piece that I recognized by Antonio Loro. "I'm playing this in my recital." It was brilliant. He played it every bit as good as what I remember from hearing it on another library record. He played the opening of another piece that I didn't know. "And this one," he said. Then he turned to the back of the sore book, to one of the last studies, a Spanish-sounding piece in E minor with flowing arpeggios and a haunting melody. "You should work on this," he said. "I have played it through a few times. Why don't you play it for me?" I began playing and struggled to make the piece flow the way it should. When I was done, He broke it down, measure by measure, and gave technical suggestions for each place where I had fumbled. Some of them were quite helpful. We worked through about half the piece this way. Then my half hour was up. I paid him the $20 he had given as his rate. "Thank you," I said. "You really helped me a lot." "Good. Call me and we can set up another lesson sometime soon." "Sure," I said, and turned to go. I never called him, although I would have been glad to have another lesson. I didn't contact Ian Mitchell again either. I didn't have the money, at least not to spend without serious consideration, and I felt Wayne had given me enough to work on to keep me busy for a while. But I did go home and practice. I also thought about the bohemian life Wayne led, studying music, taking classes in music theory, living in a rental house on his own. Why wasn't I doing this? It was everything I wanted. The next fall, when I registered for classes at Multnomah, there was a new offering in the music department, classical guitar lessons. I signed up for the lessons, and this was my introduction to Mike Davis, with whom I would study for years, eventually moving from classical to jazz guitar. I took lessons from Mike all year and gave a recital at the end. Many years later, I was riding in the car with Dad. He turned on the radio and a classical guitar piece was playing. The tone was good and clear, the music quite pleasing. But the tempo was a little slow and halting in some places. I figured it must be a live performance, perhaps by a younger player. "He's pretty good," I said. "I don't know why he doesn't play it faster. He's obviously good enough to do it." "That's you," Dad said. "That's from your recital." At once I recognized it. Yes, every piece was one I had played at my recital. I was dumbfounded. It was me, and it had sounded pretty good. Almost 3 decades later, Wayne Gottschall's name popped into my head for some reason. I was sitting at my desk at OSU, Oregon State University, in front of the computer, so I Googled him. I was surprised and saddened to find out he had died of leukemia a few years earlier at the age of 46. I was also quite surprised that he hadn't continued as a serious musician or music teacher. Instead, he had been a Spanish professor at the University of Oregon. How had Wayne, a gifted musician, traded a life of music for the more mundane work of a foreign language professor? In my case, I would be glad to do either one. I've always loved learning languages, and a professor's life is much more appealing to me than my office job. But Wayne, he had mastered the guitar in college, while I still struggle with it 30 years later. So many people could teach Spanish, but very few could ever play the guitar like Wayne. Thanks for listening. If you like this, there will be more of this sort of thing on my channel, as well as musical things like the posts I've done up until now. Thanks again, and please subscribe or click like if you want to.